Yes, you have sanctuary.
But not freedom. Gypsies don't do well inside stone walls.
So, it's been 5 years since the live-action adaptation of The Hunchback of Notre Dame was announced, and since then, there has been no progress. The last update we got came last year from the composer of the animated movie, Alan Menken, who said that he had no idea if the movie was even still happening, stating that it's a tough one because the Hunchback story involves a lot of real issues that are important issues that should be explored and discussed. And there has to be an agreement on how we deal with those issues. You know, do we do Hunchback without Hellfire? I don't think so. So it sits in this limbo right now. He says issues 3 times but doesn't specify what issues exactly make the movie so difficult to adapt. He does reference Hellfire, which I think is pretty insightful, but even then, is it the themes of lust and obsession that's causing them trouble? Injustice, religious guilt, religious hypocrisy, power and control. The adaptation of The Hunchback of Notre Dame is often considered one of the darkest Disney movies, and that's hard to argue against. If you strip it of the comic relief gargoyles who were added, some would say forced into the movie to lighten things up a bit, thematically, it covers many of the darkest and most complex topics in a way they haven't tried since. But I don't believe that these dark themes themselves are what's created a roadblock. I mean, if they've covered these themes before without too much controversy, they can do it again. I think what's truly holding them back is navigating the character of Esmeralda. She's a character that has existed for 192 years. Over that time, she has been given many faces, and after several alterations, many of which were necessary, Disney created their own version of her in the 90s. But the question is, did it work then, and can it work now? That's what I believe Disney is struggling with. Let's start off by establishing that directly adapting Esmeralda from the Victor Hugo novel is not an option for Disney, and it shouldn't be. When you think of Esmeralda, you probably have an image of a fiercely independent, young Romani woman raising her fist in the air and shouting justice. But this isn't really an accurate representation of what she's like in the original version of the story. In the novel, Esmeralda is much younger, 16. While she does have some admirable character traits, the most notable one being compassion, she is also incredibly simple-minded, if not outright stupid, throughout large portions of this novel. And her purpose in this story can mostly be summarized in one word: desire. She's the object of desire of 4 male characters and also deeply desires one of those men. Despite the story being named after the hunchback Quasimodo, to me Esmeralda really is the central figure, given how these threads of desire push the narrative forward and how they serve to emphasize the themes of the story. And this is one very depressing story. Let's start with the least depressing of the 4, Esmeralda's husband, Pierre Gringoire.
Oh, Esmeralda, I feel as if... How can I tell you how I feel?
Yes, plot change number 1. Esmeralda has a husband. Kinda. When this wandering poet gets captured by the Romani people in their stronghold in Paris, they decide to hang him, but according to their customs, a woman can save a man from execution by choosing to marry him. So Esmeralda, feeling pity for Gringoire, agrees to marry him in order to save his life. The marriage is a bit of a sham, and Esmeralda makes it clear from the beginning that she isn't interested in an emotional or physical relationship with him. I say least depressing of the 4 because despite his admiration of Esmeralda and her beauty, he fully respects the boundary she set. There is no ulterior motive here, and he does not actually do anything that puts her in harm's way, which is something that cannot be said for the other 3. And he does try to help her at multiple points in this novel. However, before you start thinking too highly of this man, you should probably know that when the time comes to save Esmeralda, in an act of self-preservation, Gringoire saves her goat Jali instead of saving her. In several adaptations of the novel, you will find Gringoire's role either greatly diminished or straight up removed, which on one hand I can kind of understand. Firstly, there's the issue of depicting Romani people as kidnapping murderous savages, which by the way happens for a second time in the story, to a much more consequential degree which I'll get into later. Truthfully, Esmeralda probably works better being single. Even if it's not a legitimate marriage, it just makes things too convoluted for film. But also, compared to the other 3 men, Gringoire's role in Esmeralda's life is nowhere near as important to the narrative. Sure, it's another example of her compassion, but the story already has a much more memorable scene that does this. With that being said, it is notable that the quote-unquote healthiest relationship she has with a male character is also too boring for most adaptations to want to include. From here on, things start to get way more depressing. Let's talk about Quasimodo. Quasimodo is ordered to kidnap Esmeralda so his master Frollo can have her for himself. However, Quasi gets caught in the process and sentenced to public punishment where he is tied to a pillory and whipped as a crowd jeers and mocks him. This is when Esmeralda, despite the fact that this man just tried to abduct her, shows Quasimodo compassion by offering him a drink of water. This act of kindness makes Quasimodo fall very deeply in love with her. Emphasis on deeply. You see, while Quasi's version of desire for Esmeralda, one which is completely unselfish, one where, like Gringoire, he also understands that she isn't romantically interested in him, and he respects that, and one which causes him to devote himself to being her protector. All of this level of devotion, also plays a pivotal role in her death. Plot change number 2, Esmeralda is supposed to die. While Esmeralda is sheltering in Notre Dame Cathedral under the protection of Quasimodo after being falsely convicted of a crime, a group of beggars and outcasts storm the church in order to save her from Frollo, who is still plotting to get her killed. However, Quasimodo believes that these outcasts are there to harm her and as a result goes completely ballistic and starts murdering all of them en masse. Frollo then seizes this opportunity to lure Esmeralda outside the cathedral, where after rejecting his advances, he turns her into the French authorities and she's executed, hanged as Quasimodo watches from the bell tower. Quasimodo, consumed by grief, disappears from Notre Dame. His bones are later found in a mass grave where he had gone to die beside Esmeralda's discarded lifeless body. The two skeletons laid next to each other, with Quasimodo's holding onto her. So yeah, his desire is not the dark, twisted type of desire of the next two men we'll be talking about, but it's also no surprise that accurately adapting this to the animation was a step too far for Disney. This level of devotion goes from the wholesome one we get in the animation, where despite it not being reciprocal, which I think was a great decision to stick to, it's still reasonable. She was good to him and he's good to her. Whereas the novel leans much more towards a pathetic, pitiful kind of love than a wholesome one. It paints Quasi as a pretty savage imbecile. A well-meaning one, don't get me wrong, but an imbecile nonetheless. How he first goes from blindly kidnapping her to then one act of kindness causing an extreme level of obsession that leads him to brutally murdering people who were there to save her. And then the manner in which he dies. It's just clear in the novel that this tragic character has some serious mental challenges on top of his physical ones. None of this is to say that the version that plays out in the novel is wrong. Again, it serves the purpose of driving home the themes, and I love how dark it is. But Disney found a decent compromise considering the audience. The relationship between Quasimodo and Esmeralda is much more developed as a mutual friendship. Even though Quasi is in love with her and it's unrequited love, part of his character development is learning to accept this and her friendship. And overall, it just feels way more balanced. They are simply two characters that care for and look out for each other. But this change then links us to the next thread. Admittedly, as a child, I wondered why she and Quasimodo didn't get together in the end. Which is not a ridiculous question to ask, especially since that's what all Disney movies prior had conditioned me to expect. He's the main male character, she's the main female character, he's in love with her, they should get together in the end. Disney was obviously aware that this would be an audience expectation, so their solution to this, in order to make that part of the ending not feel unsatisfactory, was to give Esmeralda another love interest that she does have a happily ever after with. So they can say, see, she's not with Quasimodo because she already found love with him. Which brings us to what I think is tied for the most depressing thread of desire in the novel. Yes, up there with Frollo, is Captain Phoebus. In the novel, Phoebus and Esmeralda's story is a tragic, one-sided affair. And this time, she's the one that's deeply in love with him. The original Captain Phoebus is a handsome, but shallow, selfish, untrustworthy man. He's a secondary antagonist in this story. He has no interest in pursuing a romantic relationship with Esmeralda. In fact, he's engaged to another woman that he intends on marrying. Yet still, like the other men in the novel, he finds Esmeralda attractive. So he plays along with the infatuation she has for him in order to satisfy his physical desires. I laid out Quasimodo's fixation with Esmeralda as being a little too intense and pathetic, and honestly Esmeralda's is not all that different. I'd even say the parallel is intentional. Like Quasimodo, it takes one interaction during a moment of distress for her to form this crazed obsession. Phoebus is the one that saves her from being kidnapped, and from that point onwards, she is intensely and obsessively in love with him. Both Quasi's and Esmeralda's fixations causes them to behave in really ignorant ways that leads to both of their downfall. And the really sad thing is that, at least in Quasimodo's case, he was watching a girl do something remarkably genuine and compassionate towards him when she didn't need to, whereas Captain Phoebus was just doing his job. He was a soldier who happened to be on duty at the time, came across Quasimodo attempting to kidnap a girl, and arrested him. However, in Esmeralda's head, this event is completely romanticized. As far as she's concerned, she was rescued by a handsome, brave hero who she is destined to be with. Phoebus, you were good, you were generous, you were handsome. You saved me. Me. Who am I but a poor wandering girl? I had long dreamed of an officer who should save my life. It was you I dreamed of before I met you, my Phoebus. The officer of my dream wore a fine uniform like yours, a grand look, a sword. You were called Phoebus, it is a beautiful name. I love your name, I love your sword. Draw your sword, Phoebus, and let me look at it. This is just one tiny excerpt from their first real meeting where she's already professing her love and begging him to marry her. And I promise you she's like this throughout the entire novel, if not worse. She completely idolizes him, teaches her go to write his name, whispers his name when no one's around, and repeatedly says it aloud every time he is. It's like how Rose and Jack say each other's name 100 times in every scene, except in this case, only Esmeralda does it, and Phoebus can't even pronounce her name correctly. Does this sound anything like the strong-willed, independent Esmeralda that most people have in mind? Now, in her defense, she is only 16 in the novel, and Phoebus was intentionally deceiving her. But honestly, she could not have made his job any easier. He didn't need to seduce her, because she was already under his spell the second she laid eyes on him. This goes far beyond the point of being reasonable. When she's on trial for being framed for stabbing Phoebus, she sees him there with her own eyes and cries out to him. Phoebus has the power to prove her innocence and tell everyone that Frollo stabbed him, or at the very least that it wasn't her, but he instead gallops away in silence, condemning her to death. You would think that this would finally wake her up from this spell, but you would be wrong. While Esmeralda is imprisoned, Frollo says she can save her own life by renouncing her love for Phoebus, yet she refuses to do so. Granted, part of this offer was Frollo wanting to be with her, and she's rightly repulsed by him, but it's also very clear in the novel that Esmeralda refuses to believe that Phoebus would abandon her, even though she saw it with her own eyes. This is made even more clear by the fact that Frollo lures her out of the sanctuary of Notre Dame Cathedral by telling her Phoebus is waiting for her outside. She blindly believes it, and once outside the walls, she's captured and taken for execution. And even after all that, in her final moments, as she faces execution, Esmeralda still holds on to the hope that Phoebus will come to rescue her. Phoebus, on the other hand, now married to his fiancée, watches Esmeralda's hanging with no remorse. So, with these threads of desire, Disney recognized that they needed to make changes. Firstly, because it's a kids' movie. Secondly, so Esmeralda can be a character people loved, rather than one they were annoyed by and found incredibly naive. And also, so she's more than just a tragic object of desire, with all these men playing a role in her death. Individually, all these changes make sense and they work. Take out Gringoire, who isn't necessary, make Quasi less creepy and develop their friendship, and make her love for Phoebus less intense and, most importantly, be reciprocated. And then you can have just one antagonist, Claude Frollo, who on his own can be the representative of all these dark themes. And to a pretty large extent, they nailed it with Frollo. They did not hold back in showing how sick and twisted his lust for Esmeralda was, all while feeling religious guilt over it and blaming her for his desire. Hellfire is an S-tier villain song along the likes of Be Prepared. Visually stunning, and lyrically, to this day, it surprises me that Disney went there. Protect me, Maria. Don't let this siren cast her spell. Don't let her fire sear my flesh and bone. Destroy Esmeralda, and let her taste the fires of hell, or else let her be mine, and mine alone. On top of all this, the character also plans on committing genocide against the Roma in Paris, sets fire to houses with families inside, and orders Esmeralda to be burned at the stake, which would be an even worse death than she received in the novel. But then, we get to the end. After the triumphant moment of Quasi raising her body in the air and shouting "Sanctuary" on top of Notre Dame, we are left with an ending that does feel a little at odds with the lengths Disney was willing to go to prior to this. Esmeralda lives, Frollo dies, Quasi accepts her relationship with Phoebus, and everything is wrapped in a pretty bow. I can't help but feel like it ends up diluting the message and impact of the novel. And it doesn't match up with the bravery Disney showed with their depiction of Frollo. Bravery that they couldn't extend all the way to the end. Even with his death, they did that incredibly annoying thing where a character in Quasimodo, who would be completely justified in throwing Frollo off the tower like he did in the novel, instead tries to save him. And it's circumstances out of Quasi's or Esmeralda's control that leads to Frollo's death. It's just too clean for me. This is Paris in 1482, medieval Europe. It is supposed to be brutal. It was not a problem limited to one individual that could then be neatly solved by his death. It was a societal sickness. That's what Victor Hugo's novel really demonstrates. The hatred, prejudice, and hypocrisy is everywhere, on every page. Esmeralda was in a pretty hopeless situation. In the reality of the Middle Ages, the powerful are likely to succeed, and a Roma girl, in her position, is far more likely to suffer than get a happily ever after. And so, if you make things too neat, you are not being honest. If you read modern day criticisms of the animation, you'll find people say it's sorta racist or criticizing their depiction of the Romani community. And they obviously don't mean this in regards to Frollo and Hellfire, because that's the entire point of the character. He's the villain and his viewpoint is not being endorsed. I really think that this modern day criticism could be avoided if the movie hammered in the themes the way the novel does. This story is a tragedy at heart. Esmeralda's story is a tragedy at heart. I think Disney was under the impression that in order to navigate Esmeralda's story without controversy, they needed to 1. Improve her as a character, which they were right to do, but also that they needed to lighten things up in the end. And while it may have worked then, especially for an animation, it is increasingly getting criticized as time passes. If their goal is to avoid controversy, and that's the reason why the live-action adaptation sits in limbo, I sincerely believe that they are better off making the ending a tragedy. Because the same way you'd sound ridiculous trying to criticize Frollo as a character, when that's the entire point of his character, it is difficult to criticize a story that's accurately depicting a brutal and bigoted period in time. There's a final plot change between the novel and the Disney film that I want to talk about. It is a major plot change that often gets overlooked. In the original, Esmeralda isn't even Romani. That's right, in the novel, she's raised as Romani, treated as Romani, discriminated against because they believe her to be Romani, but towards the climax of the novel, it is revealed that Esmeralda is actually called Agnes, a non-Roma French girl abducted as a baby by Romani beggars. She doesn't realize this until she's reunited with her mother towards the end of the story. Before I get into the awful aspects of this revelation, and why I think Disney deserves their props for removing this plot twist and keeping her Roma, something that many adaptations both prior and after did as well, I'll say one positive thing about this revelation and why a reading of it doesn't have to be cynical. This plot twist really illustrates how senseless the bigotry and prejudice against the Roma community in the novel is. The fact that she went through all that suffering based on an identity that she doesn't even have may be there to show that racism is not based on anything concrete. They, as people, are not fundamentally different. It's just the label and the othering that causes people to form groups and act with such hatred. With that being said, the reason why I think so many later adaptations knew to take this out is because, firstly, it's not necessary to illustrate that point. All you have to do is humanize Esmeralda as a Roma woman, and that's enough to see through the illogical cruelty of the people around her. And secondly, the change was necessary because this is a revelation that does raise a lot of eyebrows in a bad way. The Roma people throughout the novel are repeatedly described as ugly, frequently depicted as thieves, beggars, and criminals. Esmeralda's beauty then stands in contrast to the community she lives with, her compassion in contrast to their lack of it. This is already bad enough as is, so to then reveal she was never Roma to begin with, well, people wouldn't be wrong to question whether the novel is saying that no Romani woman could be considered beautiful, and none could be empathetic and compassionate, because the one character from that community given those traits is actually revealed as a standard French girl, stolen from her mother by that community. So yeah, Disney was 100% right to give us a Romani Esmeralda. I'm glad they did. I'm glad that this is who people have in mind when they hear her name. And yet, in a way, I can't help but feel like Victor Hugo's version, despite all these issues it brings up. At least for me, it still ends up being the more compelling tale that shows the reality of this kind of brutal racial hatred, especially during the Middle Ages. And that's entirely because of the ending. Now, if you're thinking, come on, let it go, of course Disney's ending was rainbows and sunshine, and it's unreasonable to expect them to go further, may I present to you the stage musical of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Mind you, this is still Disney's, but presented as a Victor Hugo adaptation with the score of Disney's Hunchback. This is where they, in my opinion, nailed the balance of what to change and what to keep. It is perfect. The comic relief gargoyles were removed, Gringoire still isn't there, Phoebus is similar to the animation rather than the novel, but it's even better because his relationship with Esmeralda is stronger and more romantic in this version. When Esmeralda is twice offered a chance to save her life by being with Frollo, in the stage musical Phoebus, despite the fact that it would break his heart, pleads with her to accept the offer so she can live. Still, Esmeralda refuses. And unlike the novel, it isn't pathetic because her dream of being with Phoebus is based in reality, and Phoebus hasn't betrayed her in any way. He's actually desperately trying to save her. When she's tied to the pyre for her execution, she's again offered the chance to save herself, which she angrily rejects. This is the strong-willed Esmeralda that people love. The pyre is lit, Quasi saves her and brings her back to Notre Dame to claim sanctuary. She thanks Quasi for being a good friend to her, and then she dies from smoke inhalation. The fact that Esmeralda's last words were thanking Quasimodo for being a good friend provides the balance in their relationship not present in the novel. It makes Quasi appear much less obsessive and pathetic because he was genuinely protecting a friend who considers him a friend. Frollo then enters and asks Quasimodo if Esmeralda is dead, which he confirms. Frollo is relieved and tells Quasi they are finally free from her poison. Quasimodo then angrily throws Frollo off the tower of Notre Dame, killing him. No messing around with Frollo slipping, Quasi trying to save his master and then the tower doing the job. No, Quasimodo rightly gets to put an end to one of the most despicable characters in fiction, and Frollo deserves nothing less than being killed by the man he raised. Phoebus tries to carry Esmeralda's lifeless body away, but is unable to due to his injuries. This is my favorite version of Phoebus by far. Quasimodo then carries her away. Years later, the two skeletons are discovered in the crypts of Notre Dame. Quasimodo is holding on to Esmeralda in his arms. The end. This debuted in Berlin in the 90s, a few years after the animated movie. Disney and the producers of the show wanted to see how preview audiences would react to it before making this the official ending of the show. Obviously, those test showings went well because that's the version they went with and continues to play to this day. So what's the problem of Esmeralda? Why not just do this for the live-action movie? Well, the thing is, that would require some nerve and courage from modern-day Disney. A movie would reach a far wider audience than the stage musical and would inevitably generate a lot of discussion. The same daring leap they took in the 90s, limited to Frollo's character, would have to happen here with the ending. So when Alan Menken says that the issues are what's put the movie in limbo, what he means is the people overhead are too scared to do this. They don't know what version to go with. They don't even know if they can do Hellfire today, let alone go to the length of the stage musical. They are scared of controversy. They are scared of being criticized for not having the perfect depiction of arguably the most famous fictional Romani character, woman at least. And so the project sits in limbo and will continue to do so until they find the courage to pick the version of Esmeralda's story that they themselves had solved. Thomas Schumacher, the president of the Disney Theatrical Group, said it perfectly when speaking on the play's ending. We don't offer a solution. We go to this place that you or others may call dark, that I would call life.
So there's 10 of you and 1 of me. What's a poor girl to do?